Welcome to Mystara for a trip to the distant future of the ancient past, where we are looking at the catalyst that started the Mystara setting, the FSS Beagle, the starship that gave Blackmoor its ludicrous technological jump and was the indirect cause of the Great Rain of Fire 1,000 years later. But what about the ship itself? What if you want to introduce another vessel like the Beagle to your setting? In your Mystara, thousands of years later, the FSS Basset Hound might come looking. And if your players find themselves beamed up for questions, threats, diplomatic relations, and/or a little bit of anal probing, it's time to set course for the second star on the left. I'm Mr. Welch, and Free Trader Beowulf, help is on the way. The Beagle only appears once in City of the Gods, third in the Blackmoor series, and the lesser cousin to Expedition to the Barrier Peaks. Where Expedition was a masterclass in crossover creepiness, City of the Gods gave us possibly the worst map in D&D history. Seriously, this map confuses more than it explains. The Beagle is described in the most abstract way possible. Rather than showing you the ship's inner workings, all crew compartments are the same, and you get around the ship by pushing elevator buttons randomly. You get taken to the room you happen to have keyed in. It arbitrarily tells you the important parts of the ship can't be reached by the characters, so they won't be described at all. Assuming you make it into the ship, and the Beagle contains one of Mystara's biggest retcons or continuity errors. In Wrath of the Immortals, it's revealed that a future immortal was created when he stopped an insane crew member from destroying the engines, thus blowing up the planet. Instead, the ship implodes, preventing the earth-shattering kaboom, and while the Beagle is destroyed, Mystara is saved. In City of the Gods, the ship's command staff eventually contacts King Uther, establishes diplomatic ties, and allies and integrates into Blackmoorian society after a few years. This is normally the player characters over the course of the adventure. Still, if they fail, it's mentioned in another book that the fetch is rewarded for establishing ties with King Riesling, and thus starting the introduction of advanced technology into a medieval nation. Pick which version you want, but we're going with the diplomacy version, as this is a Blackmoor video. Mystara is not alone in the universe, not counting the other settings of D&D, but I mean in its galaxy. Somewhere out among the stars is the Galactic Federation, a small but diverse group of planets seeking new worlds for colonizations or memberships in their ranks. Who are these races? How many planets are we talking about? Does this tie in with Star Frontiers? Your guess is as good as mine, as the entirety of this information on these guys is a single paragraph on page 3, and they are never mentioned again. There's been a lot of speculation on the makeup and purpose of the Federation on the vaults, but that's all it is, speculation. We know of the Grin, the crew of the Beagle, who are entirely human, only appear slightly green under Mystara's sun. The module also says that there's only one inhabitable planet in the Mystara system, which is wholly contradicted by multiple later products, especially this Immortals box set, so try not to think too hard about all the contradictions on this one. The Beagle was a standard Federation survey ship tasked with mapping the nearby world and a sector on the other side of the galaxy. As they scanned a Class 9 pre-technology planet, the ship suffered a drive failure that should have been impossible by all standards. But impossible or not, the Beagle was locked into the planet's gravitational pull and they were going down. Captain Riesling immediately took control of the situation and used all the remaining drive's power to crash the Beagle safely into a dry seabed. I say crash because the Beagle was not designed to land. It had no equipment for that. The Beagle skidded to a halt relatively intact, though the impact destroyed the remaining drives and crippled any thrusters that would have been needed to get them back into orbit. The FSS Beagle became the City of the Gods, and Mystara was changed forever. The Beagle is 2 miles long and about 3/4 of a mile wide. It consists of 4 decks, with each deck standing 60 feet tall, regardless of its use, with a few exceptions. Even after crashing, the ship is almost entirely intact. There's no wrecked passages, there aren't wires hanging from the ceiling, all the doors are intact, and the entirety of the ship has power. Walking through the halls of the Beagle, you would have no idea that this ship had crash-landed. The exact count of the crew is unknown. The module doesn't even hint at a number. Most are in cryo-sleep, and only a fraction are awake and running about the ship. Most encounters will be with robots who maintain the ship's conditions. From the number of the different pods, the ship's complement should easily be over 1,000, though only a few hundred are currently awake. The hull is comprised of an unknown metal that is harder than anything you will find in Mystara. It's impervious to standard weapons, even magic will have difficulty cutting through it. You'll run out of spells before you run out of wall. Light panels illuminate every bit of the ship, though they are controlled with motion sensors, only turning on when there is movement inside their area. You can control the illumination level by giving it a command, but that requires you to speak Galactica, the language of the Grin, and the Cylons. But we don't mention that part out loud. There are computer panels in each room and all the corridors at regular intervals, where crewmen can send messages to other sections or make announcements to parts of the ship if they have the authority to do so. Because the internal sections of the ship tend to be enormous, they have a set of transport vehicles that take the crew from one part to another. If you walked, the adventure would be over before you got there. The ground cars can go the length of the entire ship in 20 minutes. That sounds amazing until you break out the math, and that just breaks down to 10 miles an hour. But the cars will instantly kill anyone it strikes, so either they have spikes jutting out from the front, or somebody didn't do their math. More than likely, they forgot a round is 1 minute and a turn is 10 minutes. Doing a mile a minute instead of a mile every 10 minutes is much more impressive. You will get from one place to another by calling a transport, which diverts from the tubes to your pickup point, and then off you go. Much like the Sega CD game Sewer Shark, where you had to turn off the usual route to get recharged, but you could barely make out the direction lights because the graphics were so pixelated. Don't tell me I'm the only person that remembers that game fondly. Alright, mainly because I won a Sega CD from my job at Sears because nobody else bothered to enter the contest, and that's the game that came with it. That's probably the only reason why I remember that game fondly. Not all the ships survived intact, but that's more from the mutiny than the crash. The captain put most of the crew in stasis to survive the impact, but the enviopods, the ones that they kept local fauna in, mostly killed the occupants. The chief engineer decided he didn't want to wait 50 years for rescue because this was a Class 9 pre-technology planet, and everybody knows there is a substantial difference between a Class 8 and a Class 9 pre-technology planet, if you catch my drift. This led to a significant battle, resulting with the captain trying to keep the mutineers from leaving the ship and setting themselves up as gods in the surrounding areas. These areas will be easily noticed from the weapons fire and the explosives that have damaged parts of the ship. There's multiple sections in the Beagle, called pods, and they're given in a random order. They aren't in the order listed by the chart you roll to determine where you randomly go, and they're not in alphabetical order either. That would have made my job so much easier. Instead, I'll take them in the order that they're listed. Car depots are where the various robots store and maintain the transports. There's up to 80 vehicles stored at one time, but it's just one giant garage. Robot depots are where the robots are repaired, recharged, and stored for later use. There are 4 varieties of robots here, and getting discovered in one of these areas is a very bad thing. If the alarm is already sounded, then you will be facing lots of killer robots that are already expecting you. Again, don't be here in case that happens. The maintenance pod contains the machine shop. This is all automated with many tools and devices that can fabricate anything the ship needs to function. Except for working engines, apparently. Activating the machines requires specialty knowledge characters won't possess, or nearly all crew members for that matter. The transit pod contains the flying vessels used to scout the surrounding areas, but these are heavily guarded and, more importantly, almost impossible to use if you don't have the training. Even if you do get lucky and activate one, the ship will likely destroy any unauthorized departure with its point defense weapons. Storage pods are just large warehouses containing vast amounts of spare parts, from tools to uniforms to specialized replacement parts for computers and such. You can't find specific items without the help of a computer, it's just too much stuff to sort through. Usually you'll tell the computer what you need and a robot fetches it for you. The only things you can't get from here are food, drinks, and weapons. These are either synthesized when you order them or they're stored elsewhere. Stasis pods contain hundreds or thousands of crew members waiting to be awakened when rescued or the captain decides to join Blackmoor. Awakening someone in stasis requires special skills, as doing it improperly has an excellent chance of killing them or driving them insane. Even if you manage to awaken one properly, they're disoriented and act as if they are under the effect of a charm spell for over an hour, which makes the Wrath version of events make even less sense. Crew pods are where the awakened crew sleeps and spend their downtime. They consist of multiple cubbies or sleeping spaces stacked on top of each other. There's a communal shower, some eating stations, and a holo tank for entertainment. Since there are few crewmen awakened when the events of the City of the Gods happen, you'll find just a few people in each of the pods. Enviopods contain creatures from the local atmosphere that were taken to be studied. Only a tiny section are occupied. Many of these were damaged in the crash or the mutiny. One has been converted into a makeshift bridge holding mutineers or crew members who have broken one rule or another. Fully functional enviopods look just like the host creature's terrain. 2 observation domes are used to hold formal ceremonies or parties, but neither has seen much use since the crash. The material comprising the domes has the same properties as the hull, and while transparent, they're almost indestructible. There's a lot of areas that are mentioned, but get no write-ups as well. We don't know anything about the ship's bridge, the captain's quarters, or the engineering section, and they are mentioned more than once. It's also said that the party can't get to these sections, so why bother talking about them? Because if you knew my party, like everybody else should know their party, the parties can get to these sections, and they will do their best to try. Never underestimate your player characters. There is quite a bit on the ship's robots, from the numerous utility bots to the TPK spawning defense bots. There's also the ship's cyborgs, which are more akin to Terminators than crossover-happy superheroes. That's everything I could find on the Beagle. There's no actual map. You're supposed to roll on a chart when you get to a section, and then whatever you roll is where you arrive. You're restricted to just a single deck in the module, so they don't even bother describing what's on the higher levels. There's no crew mentioned by name except for the captain. I know this is a lot of crossover from my module review, but once you get to the Beagle, it's so open-ended, there's not much for the DM to do except roll on random charts. It's a pale comparison to barrier peaks because there's no searching for keys that get you into other sections. You punch in numbers randomly on a computer and see where the magic card takes you. I searched the vaults on the off chance somebody filled in the blanks for the Beagle. Even the Blackmoor sites didn't have anything showcasing the entirety of the ship. Just the incomplete version the module gives you. Next week, we're grabbing our slings and short swords and heading to where the trees are speaking Hen, with a look at the armed forces of the Five Shires. For such a decentralized nation, their military forces are scarily efficient. Until then, set phasers to annoy.